Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Supply Chain Insights Year in Review. I'm your host, Allison Crawford. 2015 has been an exciting year. We've analyzed our industry and delivered insights to accelerate your supply chain performance through an open content research model. To wrap up 2015, we invited two featured bloggers from the new Beat Fusion community to discuss the supply chain insights research findings of the last year and debate the impact each had and will continue to have on our industry. We chose these bloggers to set the tone of the supply chain thought leadership that drives performance, and we're getting a jump start on the innovative content that the community will deliver in 2016. Before I hand this over to Laura and the rest of the panel to review the research, there are a few things that I want to cover. First, we're recording today's session and we'll post it to our on-demand webinar page. You can visit our website to listen to this or any of the other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out the slides to all attendees within 24 hours. We encourage you to share these slides with others in your organization, and if you have questions, reach out to Laura or myself to set up a discussion. We also want to hear your questions about our findings. Please post to the Q&A or chat function to the left of your screen. We've left time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. Finally, we will be live tweeting the webinar, so if you'd like to join in the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCIWebinar and @SCIInsightsLLC during the event. Now, let me introduce your panel. First, we're joined by Bob Davis, a principal industry consultant in the Supply Chain Management Solutions Group at SAS Institute. From 2000 to 2013, Bob held various SAS roles in product management, supporting inventory optimization and supply chain cost analysis. Prior to joining SAS, Davis worked for over 20 years with Nestle and ConAgra in their grocery product divisions. During that time, he helped develop best practices in account management, trade spending analysis, and replenishment planning. He received national awards for excellence in sales and business management. Next on your panel is Bram Desmet, Managing Director of Solventure. Bram knows how to transform a business and how to foster agility with a mix of strategy, advanced analytics, people, process, and systems change. He has 10 years' experience as a management consultant at both Mobius and Solventure. As a consultant, he supports global industrial and retail companies in transforming their supply chains and operations. Since 2010, Bram is also an adjunct professor at the Verlick Business School. His research interests are in strategy, supply chain and operations management, and he aims at bridging the gap between academic research and pragmatic business improvement. He holds a PhD in operations research and a master's in mathematics from Ghent University. He also holds an executive MBA from Verlick. Finally, your host, Laura Cesari, founder of Supply Chain Insights. As an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on the changing phase of enterprise technologies. Her research is designed for the early adopters seeking first-mover advantage. Current research topics include digital consumer, supply chain sensing, demand shaping and revenue management, market-driven value networks, accelerating innovation through open design networks, the evolution of predictive analytics, emerging business intelligence solutions, and technologies to improve safe and secure product delivery. This is quite a distinguished panel, and I'm sure there's lots to say today, so without further ado, let me hand our presentation over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you for joining us today. We love sharing research. We spend about 22% of our revenue on investment on research that we share with people openly. And the Beat Fusion community is designed to enable development of supply chain practices around the world. We write for the line of business leader, and we started research not thinking that necessarily we have best practices, but that we need to discover what's happening in the supply chain world with a set of hypotheses. And then we basically allow the research to tell us the current state and the evolution of the industry. Today I'm joined by Bob and Bram. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, Laura.
Yes.
Hi, Laura, and thank you very much for having us.
Yes, so it's interesting. Bob and Bram have never really met in person. Bram is someone I met on my travels in Europe, and Bram has been very interested in inventory and is actually writing a book on inventory optimization with his work that he does in consulting and also his work that he does at the Verlick School. And Bob has just authored his second book on inventory optimization at SAS. So I think it's very interesting to have two panelists who really don't know each other, but both have a strong interest in inventory, and they've been great contributors in the Beat Fusion community as featured bloggers. And what we do in the Beat Fusion community is we invite people who have a passion to write and share research and insights, and then we basically federate all the content and share it with the people that are in the community. So at the end of the call, if you want to hear the webinar, you want to get the slides, please sign up for the Beat Fusion community, and we'll tell you how to do that in the end of the webinar. So Bob and Bram, let's start. So the first of the year, I have a wonderful research team, and I asked the research team to go back and look at all of the survey responses that we had collected and give us some aggregate feedback about what description or descriptors do supply chain leaders use to describe their supply chains. And we found that 1 in 3 say that it's traditional, tactical, cautious, with a lot of room for improvement. And they really want agile, fast, proactive, and aligned. So the question that I have is, how can we say we have best practices when we think that there's a lot of room for improvement and we're traditional and cautious? What do you think, Bram?
Well, my experience in 2015, as in years before, is that indeed I see still a quite traditional focus in companies where each of the functions in a company, whether it's the sales function or the production function or the procurement function, is more inwardly focused. And people talk a lot about collaborative processes like S&OP, but my feeling is that a lot of companies still have a long way to go to really come to a collaborative process, and that some of these collaborative processes within the company and across the company boundaries is exactly what is needed to be agile, fast, proactive, aligned, and so on. So I certainly recognize the result of this slide or the result of your study with what I encounter in companies.
And Bob, how about your thoughts here? You know, why do we say we have best practices when there's such an overwhelming feeling we need improvement?
Well, Laura, thankfully there aren't words on there like non-existent and horrible and things like that. At least we're in a traditional, tactical, and cautious area. But,
well put, yeah.
Yeah, what I have seen, and I agree with Bram, is what he's saying is that so much of the time that we have spent in the supply chains tends to be inwardly focused, all about efficiencies and things like that, and it's built from the bottom up. So you're going to get those people who have done things the same way for year after year after year. They continue to do it that way, and thankfully, what we're starting to find more and more is these leaders within the organization are realizing that the supply chain is not just the dirty, dark underbelly of the company. It's actually something that can be a differentiator. And they're now putting the focus in, and I think that's where the journey is going, that they need to look outside the box and start to get into that agile, risk-taking, strategic control. So it is a journey. It's not a destination, and I think that that's where people are right now.
Well, thanks. So let's look at some of the spending data. This came from a study that we did at the end of the year where we asked the respondents to give us some feedback about how are they spending money. And we found that over half of the funds are actually being spent by line of business. And so there's a shift from the IT to the line of business buyer, and about 5% increase in the actual spending in the supply chain area. But when we asked the respondents to indicate where they're going to spend money, about 1/3 said that they're going to be spending on enterprise resource planning, that 18% said that they were going to be investing in demand and supply planning, and about 1/3 are investing in newer technologies for either business intelligence, cost to serve, e-commerce. So about 1/3 of the money is going to new process innovation. And when we ask about types of deployment, we see that about 25% plan to use some form of business process outsourcing. And I remember when I did a study in 2006, this was about 1%. And about 63% say that they plan to use software as a service. And when I did a study in 2006, it was about 5% software as a service. So I guess I have two questions for you. One, does it surprise you that we're kind of stuck, but yet we're investing in the same old technologies? Let's start with that. Bob, your thoughts?
That is a good question. Let's face it, SAP has definitely got everyone's attention going to HANA, and so there's an awful lot of the IT. Most of the organization is saying, what are we going to do? And so there's a lot of focus on the ERP systems and what have you. As a matter of fact, I was at a major CPG company, and they were looking into developing a project around optimization. And their whole thing was, we need to get this project done before we have to pull engineers off of this project and put them on HANA. We're seeing an awful lot of that. But what I'm also seeing, and I think that this is what shows in your charts, is that in the supply chain, we're getting an awful lot of companies that are looking to kind of bypass IT and get into the software as a service. That also is kind of concerning me, is because that tends to be project-based. And in the supply chain, it becomes very elastic. If you don't continue on with it, there's a tendency to go back to the same old ways. So there's excitement. There's also concern on my feeling that in the future, IT has got to be a partner in the supply chain and how we do this. And that's kind of what my view is.
Well, and one of the things that worries me is, are we creating silos in the cloud? Yeah, Ron, your thoughts?
Yeah.
I think in general, companies are really underinvesting in demand and supply planning solutions. I think in some of your research and in your book, the supply chain metrics, Laura, you mentioned that a lot of companies are stuck at the intersection of, you could say, profitability like EBIT and inventory turns, and that demand and supply planning are crucial processes and crucial tools to improve there. Yeah? And if you compare the cost of deploying a demand and supply planning tool and process compared to deploying an ERP tool and revising all of your operational processes, I think the payoff of demand and supply planning is much bigger compared to ERP. Yeah? Though I also see in a lot of companies that it's exactly the ERP which is consuming most of the IT resources, which kind of gets all the attention and also makes that business users get stalled and don't have any IT resources internally to keep improving their supply chain processes, which to my feeling also explains that business users then more tend to go to software as a service, for which they don't necessarily need a lot of internal IT resources, because they just want to move the business forward. And I think they are exactly right to do so. So I'm really curious where this will be going, whether the ERP the ERP load, which is being put both financially and in resources on companies, whether that burden will kind of continue, or whether some way or another we will see a kind of a rebalancing.
Well, and I think there's ERP for transactions, which I think we've got to have, and we've got to do that well. But the whole decision support layer that's being redefined, I think we've got a real battle waging, whether it's deeper analytics or software as a service or outside in. And I think that we'll continue to see that happen through 2016 with really the birth of a different set of decision support, which I find quite exciting. So I'm hoping that we can shift some of the spending, that we can stabilize ERP and shift some of the spending. But let's now look at the organization, right? Some of the research we've been doing is on how do we help the organization mature. And we find that companies that have source, make, and deliver reporting to the same leader will make the fastest progress on the metrics that matter. And yet only a third of companies have source, make, and deliver reporting to the same organization. And then the other question is around a formal organization. So 70% have a formal organization, and it's 15 years on average. And we now have a supply chain leader at the table, which it's taken us about 20 years to get, and 70% of organizations have a supply chain leader reporting to the C-level or president. So we're at different levels of maturity there. And about a third of companies have a supply chain center of excellence, but only a half of those that have a supply chain center of excellence say it's effective. So part of the dilemma is sorting through the technology options, and really getting at the tension between do we have best practices or evolving practices, and the fact that with growth slowing, there's such a tension on what is possible in the organization. So we also see in the evolution of supply chain centers of excellence, and this is part of the infographic portfolio that we launched 2 weeks ago and is available on our website and also in the Beat Fusion community. One of the things we were trying to test this year was what is the value proposition of a supply chain center of excellence, because with close scrutiny on overhead, the question is, can we build a supply chain center of excellence to be able to drive greater value, and what does greater value look like? So we find that when the supply chain center of excellence is seen as effective by the organization, that the organization is more aligned. It's more aligned between finance and the commercial operations, and we also see finance and supply chain, manufacturing, and procurement. And the alignment comes from work on network design and form and function of inventory. And when that happens, the organization believes it's more agile, more proactive, and more strategic, which, Bram and Bob, if you think back to that first graph we had around metaphors, the supply chain center of excellence is really poking at how do we evolve and how do we, kind of the oars in this picture, how do we row this forward? What are your insights about organizations, centers of excellence? Any tips or tricks or insights from your work in the field? Bob, you want to go first?
Sure. It's interesting when I've been out into the field and talking with organizations about the technologies and that kind of things. And it brought me back to something that you said a little bit ago about silos within silos within silos is almost what we've gotten to.
Now we're getting them in the cloud,
Right. And what's happening is supply chain tends to be notorious for small groups trying something as a project to be able to improve one metric that they're maybe graded on. And this has a tendency for everybody in the organization to follow that shiny object for a little while, and if it improves, they might do something with it.
Right.
But what I have found is these organizations that get beyond the silo about silo and do something that is more, I would say, holistic around something that they're going to do. This improves the, stickiness of what they're doing. And it pushes it beyond what I would call just the technology. You start to have a full-blown view of how do I integrate this, how do I change my process, and how do I change my people so that I can do this and it sticks. And that's where the Center of Excellence, I think, has improved. Indeed, I was working with one company down in St. Louis that What they wanted to do was to create something that they could have as a distinctive competence to take to their retailers that would set them apart. Their supply chain could help the retailer's supply chain. That's where I think that we're going to go, is not just efficient supply chains, but how does this center of excellence create a distinctive competence that they can use as a competitive advantage? That's where I see this going.
Yeah, the article I wrote on the efficient supply chain isn't the most effective, and, how do we have the supply chain center of excellence drive growth and really build new business models has certainly gotten a lot of attention. So I agree with you. Bram, your thoughts here?
I think the supply chain center of excellence and also supply chain leadership is something that I've been working on quite intensively in 2015. I've also posted an article in the blog on Beat Fusion that people could review, which talks about the supply chain triangle, and which kind of tries to bring to the C-level, like in the end we are trying to balance service, cost, and cash, yeah? And getting that message across at the C-level and making people at the C-level think in a supply chain instead of thinking functionally, I think is a crucial element if you really want to move forward by the implementation of processes like S&OP, but certainly also to give supply chain centers of excellence a chance. And I do recognize that the companies where that executive supply chain vision and supply chain leadership is present, that indeed let us say the forming and the growing of a supply chain center of excellence is very worthwhile and is leading to the benefits that you are reporting to. So I think it's certainly the direction where the leaders are going into, and I think there's also still a lot of work to be done in companies in general to move in that direction.
Yeah, and there's been a question about what are the demographics for each of our studies, and this is really a snippet of studies across all of our research, and all of our research studies we share the demographics, and each of these are represented by a little different population. So at the bottom of each of our slides we have some information about how many people responded and a little bit around the type of response, but to get into the specific demographics around industry and around maturity and maybe around deployment strategy, you've really got to go to the specific report. But this came from our global summit, and one of the things that we find that centers of excellence often will do is they will have innovation money and they'll be testing and learning, and part of the tension in the Center of Excellence is the movement to more test and learn small experimentation. So as we get into new forms of analytics, we're not just putting in big projects anymore. We're really starting and we're testing and we're learning, and we may not know where they're going to end up. And so we ask the people coming to our global summit, which I hope everybody on the call makes it this year in September, because we're going to again push the envelope to imagine the future. We ask people about disruptive technology with the greatest impact on supply chain effectiveness, and people up until 2020 are really investing in analytics, and I see all these new vendors that are coming into the space for analytics with names like, FusionOps and Trufa and Halo and, Every Angle. And, we've also got, the in-memory apps like QlikView, and of course Bob Sass is doing a lot of work with descriptive analytics, and Spotfire and Tableau with a lot of visualization. And there's a lot of investment in analytics that helps us to go across heterogeneous environments. But then we're starting to move into the Internet of Things and, the machine learning and robotics. And, as we look at that evolution of analytics, we get into structured and unstructured data. And most of the supply chain work has all been done on structured data. It's all been done on transactional data. And, we need to have safe and secure supply chains with product traceability and deeper supply chain visibility and the use of unstructured data for geolocation and mapping and sensor data from RFID and other sensors, and really be able to harvest unstructured data and supply chains with warranty and quality information. And I think this Center of Excellence that's really testing new forms of analytics and starting to ask the question about the use of structured and unstructured data with prescriptive and predictive analytics is sort of poking a hole at that. We're traditional and we're cautious, but it's in the face of, big ERP, and it's tough, Bram, what do you see in Europe?
I think we certainly see a lot of experimentation with big data type of techniques, and I have a PhD, so like 5 years ago, I still felt like a nerd, and thanks to the big data wave, I all of a sudden feel hot. So I certainly encourage also the use of analytics to improve decision making. I'm a true believer in that. Where I still struggle a little bit is that certainly on the unstructured data and the big data part, I see a lot of applications which are more in the marketing or consumer research domain, and we're also doing some experimentation ourselves on how to translate that into the supply chain domain, for instance, to increase short-term forecasting, demand sensing, but also tactical forecasting. And so I also believe there's a whole new domain which is opening up, on which I'm also very curious to see which type of applications will kind of crystallize in the years to come that will give us the necessary boost to improve the supply chain performance.
Yeah, I do too. And about this area, I think that this whole area is in, the solution of better support and processes which will manufacture, or the redefinition of maintenance, or the redefinition of digital path to purchase. What are your thoughts here?
I'm sorry, Laurie.
Bob, are you still there?
I am still here.
Your thoughts about big data and centers of excellence and how to go about analytics. Your thoughts?
Yes, you were just kind of breaking up at my end, so I couldn't quite hear my name. I apologize.
Okay, that's all right.
I've been in and around supply chains for 30 some odd years, and if there's one thing I've noticed about supply chains, they do love a new big thing coming down the pike, and sometimes they'll go off in tangents chasing after something. And when I first saw big data, that's something I started to see is this a solution looking for a problem? But as I've been watching it more and more, my hope that it was not just going to be just a bigger OLAP cube and looking in reverse, I'm beginning to see more and more of a focus in on how to use a lot of data, for instance, consumer data that is coming directly off of point of sale so that people can understand the true purchasing in the supply chain compared to just shipments. And all kinds of things that could be looked around with risk and things like this. So I really think that big data is going to be the thing over the next couple of years. And like you say, it's about the traceability. And I think more than anything, it's around this supply chain visibility and routing and understanding of cost versus risk and things like that that is going to take us away from just our same old metrics that we measure into doing a lot of this experimentation, looking at innovation of how we can look at our supply chains compared to the same old way we always have.
Yeah, and I wrote a blog post on unstructured, non-relational thoughts, and is the, what is Hadoop and why should I care? And, that blog post has actually been the top-rated blog post for the year. So I think that, as we stretch ourselves and think about, not tightly integrating data, but leaving data at rest and using Hadoop techniques and open code standards like Spark, I think we're going to start to see some real innovative things happen. So I'm excited to see that. So,
as a matter of fact, Laura, as I was listening to some of the discussion back and forth, there was a gentleman named Joe that was bringing up about experimentation, and I couldn't agree more that yes, you need to have a holistic understanding of the supply chain, but you do need to experiment, and I think he's spot on. And this is where the big data kind of thing can come into play of, hey, let's look at these areas and look through the unstructured data. How could we actually improve, and what's an experiment that we potentially could do? I think this is very exciting for the next 3 to 5 years.
You know, but Bob, the problem is that test and learn and experimentation flies in the face of traditional IT programs. I actually did an interview with CIO Magazine, and I said, you know, our big barriers are that as we enter in this world of analytics, we think that we have to have an as-is and a to-be state, and we think we have to have a defined ROI, and we think we've got to have a big project plan. And this whole concept around let's test small and let's have some innovation funding, because all of our funding is tied to a definitive ROI and we don't know what the ROI is. I think it's a real barrier here. Bram, any thoughts here?
I think it's true, Laura, and it also just makes me think of the supply chain. Let us say the supply chain thinking in itself. I believe that it requires leadership, and it requires people who believe in it and are willing to invest in it without having the business case necessarily completely clear or completely detailed and figured out. Yeah? And it takes courage for leaders to stick out their neck and to invest in it and to get the ball rolling. But I do see companies who take that effort or who take that leap. And I'm also quite confident that those companies within this and a couple of years will have proven to put their bet on the right horse, and they will probably get a competitive advantage out of that. That's my expectation.
Well, you know, and there's a great podcast that we did this year with Fran OSullivan from IBM, who talked about how she takes her cost reduction or her continuous improvement money that she saves the company, and she basically tells the company, I'm going to take X% of that and I'm going to invest it in analytics. And I'm not going to guarantee the return, but, you know, she talks about how the return has been X number of times what they expected. And she talks about how she used that process to really educate finance. And, you know, finance feels that they have to have all this control over the evolution. And this is really an area where I think we've got to be able to use the money that we're basically saving the company, take a percentage and reinvest it to test and learn. Because I think there's great dividends here. But we'll never get there with our traditional project approach of a definitive ROI and a definitive project plan and, you know, not allowing people to be creative with new forms of analytics. So great discussion. Let's shift the discussion now to risk. This is one of my favorite studies we did during the year, where we actually looked at top disruptions and we looked at material events. And, you know, we were asking companies about, you know, did they have a material event association with a disruption? And a disruption was when we actually had a major stoppage in the supply chain. It could have been a supplier issue. It could have been a geopolitical event. It could have been a weather issue. And it was interesting to me that the West Coast port slowdown in the U.S. was the top-rated risk issue. I didn't expect this because my brain was really hardwired for the floods in Thailand or, you know, perhaps the Arab Spring that happened in the Middle East. And so when I got this and I started doing research on just where our ports are and the forecast for 2016, I get rather scared. I mean, you know, we're not ready for the big ships that are coming. Our port infrastructure is not up to the instantaneous rates for unloading. And I think this will continue to be of issue. So, one of my favorite infographics that we built this year was really the kind of this path of the new risk profile and how, we may think about, the traditional views of risk, but, things like ports and roads that we take for granted, are really being major stoppage issues. And the way we get around it, I think, is, sensing and visibility and the use of technologies and design of inventory buffers and training and educating leadership. So, Bram, I don't know if you followed this work and you have any thoughts here on risk management. Does this surprise you? Is it consistent with what you're seeing in Europe?
Well, I think in general, at least from my experience, risk management is becoming significantly more important. Yeah? The companies that have done a good job in, let's say, being more aligned have also been able to kind of remove any internal buffers that are not really required. Yeah? So I think companies that advance on the supply chain ladder, they typically make their supply chains more lean. But as the supply chains become more lean, they also get more prone to risk and to disruption. And I've not seen that a leaner supply chain has always been, let's say, complemented with a better risk management, which means that if then all of a sudden you get surprised by floods in Thailand or earthquakes in Japan, which I have seen at some of the companies I've worked with, it has a major impact on the sales and the market share in your markets. So I truly believe it will become even more important as supply chains further mature and we become more lean and we improve, as you mentioned, on that intersection between the profitability and things like working capital or inventory turns.
Yeah, I agree. Bob, your thoughts here?
First of all, Bram, I think you're right, spot on with that assessment. I live out here in Portland, Oregon, and the land of Phil Knight and Nike. And, his entire company was built on trying to find the cheapest labor. And that has really propelled an awful lot of supply chains over the years. And in turn, one of the big things I saw, and you brought up about the floods in Thailand, that was one of the things that started to happen is when you have this low cost of labor in a certain area, you don't factor in those risks of here comes the rains and the roads are impassable, you can't get the product to market. And I think risk is one of the big areas that we need to address, and I'm seeing new technology starting to come into play like supply chain design that isn't the traditional I need to put my warehouse here. It has more to do with how do I route products so that it isn't just about cost, but I can take into this whole process of getting my products to market in the least risk-free, or I should say in a less risky manner. So then you can take a look at, like you say, the supply sensing and understanding how your suppliers are reacting and how you can mitigate that risk. I think this is a strong area in the next couple of years. So I'm happy. This is exciting to talk about. This is good stuff.
And it's funny because when I talk to process-based companies around supplier development, supplier sensing, it's such foreign concepts. And when I talk to consumer or retail companies around thinking about infrastructure or things like ports, that's a new concept. And, I think we have got such vulnerability with our outsourced relationships, with, the fact that we haven't really designed inventory buffers, that I think we've got to really think about risk far more holistically. Well, let's go to our next section, which is on sales and operations planning. We did quite a bit of work this year on sales and operations planning. It's a popular topic for people, and I think this is our 5th study on sales and operations planning. Of course, they're all in our communities. But one of the things that people really, really struggle with are the change management issues on S&OP. And S&OP, the Tough Nut to Crack, was actually our 5th best read report for the year, and we published it in July. And, people don't have just one S&OP process. They've got 4. And, as we get into the global multinational, they're really struggling for how do they make decisions in global regional governance. And there's a lack of balance in S&OP between the big S and the OP, and they're not clear on how do they get balance. And then how do they use planning? Because I'm really shocked that about 80% of companies don't really have constraint-based planning. Even though we evolved planning in the 1990s, the concepts of constraint-based planning actually went backwards when we went to the tightly integrated ERP, and they lack skilled resources. So these are really major issues, but probably the biggest issue that I hear in my travels is the understanding of the executive team to support S&OP. Fran, your thoughts? I know you work a lot on S&OP kind of projects. What do you think when you see this infographic?
Well, I certainly recognize the lack of understanding of the executive team, and also when I'm teaching at the business school, it's certainly one of my favorite topics, the topic I try to work on. And again, referring to one of my Beat Fusion posts on the supply chain triangle, I see that in many companies, sales remains primarily service-driven or top-line driven, where operations people in general remain very cost-driven, and it can be production people, but certainly also a lot of procurement people I meet or purchasing people are very focused on the purchasing cost. And in the end, what you want to reach is have a good service at the best possible cost and with the lowest possible inventory. So it's about balancing, and you need to make sure that everybody in the executive team is aligned that that's where you want to go. And I think it's a necessary requirement to make an S&OP process successful. So that's one thought. And a second thought I see that S&OP has been around for quite some time now as a term. And I think if you ask companies, do you have an S&OP? Many companies, they have an S&OP, or at least they pretend they have an S&OP, but to me it doesn't seem to be very effective. It's not necessarily driving the business value that it could. And a good indicator for me is, are the important decisions being made in the executive S&OP meeting, or are they being made outside of the S&OP process? And unfortunately, I still see a lot of companies where indeed the important decisions are being made outside of those type of meetings. So I really believe in the value that this process can drive, but I do think that there's a big issue with getting the executive team aligned on. It's not just about optimizing one parameter, but it's optimizing a complete set of parameters, and that will be required to take S&OP processes to the next level.
Yeah, and we actually have a person listening that says the opportunity is balance, and it's a numbers game. And Bram, I know we've done a lot of work around what is balance, and I think the whole discussion about what is balance and how it defines supply chain excellence, I know you've done a lot of writing about this, and I have as well, is something that really needs work, because people say they want to define supply chain excellence, but they're not clear on it, and they're not clear on what is balance. And often I see people get really caught up on understanding the basic metrics. Like I was at a client the other day that said that they wanted to reduce working capital, but what they really meant was they wanted to improve inventory, right? And they didn't really look at the total components of working capital. Or I'll be at another client that, really wants to improve customer service, and I say, well, how do you measure it in the eyes of the customer, and what does the customer really value? And they're not clear on that. And so I think that, part of our challenge here is getting clear on outcomes. Would you agree, Bram?
Yeah, I fully agree. And
Bob, your thoughts here? Go ahead. Sorry,
Bram. Hey, I agree with you completely, Laura. As a matter of fact, kind of stole some of my thunder.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
When it comes to S&OP, wouldn't it be cool to have a one-size-fits-all thing that you just put into a company and there it is and it works? Every company's different.
It's not going to happen. Yeah, every company's different.
It ain't going to happen.
Right.
And
but,
what I was going to say is that, in essence, one of the things that I'm finding again and again, and this kind of falls into exactly what Bram said, and that is that management participation in these kind of things and the willingness to tackle very difficult problems is what that meeting's all about. And sometimes what ends up happening with S&OP, it's all around trying to come up with a metric, come up with the calculation at the subordinate level, bring it up, and then nobody really wants to tackle the hard, difficult issues. I was just at a conference over in Amsterdam where they were talking about S&OP, and one company brought their S&OP process and showed it. And one of the interesting things that the gentleman running S&OP was doing was he would show in this graphic the participation of management from the different silos. And he had them 4 different techniques. One was no participation, they didn't show up. The other was they showed up, but they were disengaged. They just looked at their phones and stuff like that. And then what was called interact. That's where they were asking questions. And the final one was engaged. That's where they were asking and looking at ways to change things. And as he showed this, almost a heat map of participation, you could see then the actual creative ways in which these silos were actually coming to these meetings and coming up with new ideas. Experimentation, where a normal S&OP process would have been, I can't get enough of this XYZ widget product for production. What should we do? Well, the natural thing would be you need to increase your inventories to take care of that supplier variance. Well, they couldn't do that because of costs. So they had to come up with innovative ways. If that manager had not shown up or just was disengaged, it never would have been able to be solved. But bringing management in and having them own this and also tell their subordinates to think outside the box, that's where you really get some really neat things with S&OP and that innovation.
Well, and I like the idea of measuring the levels of involvement. One of the things that people will ask me is, what is the alignment and how do you measure effectiveness? So one of the things we did, back to our metaphors, was we said, if you have an effective S&OP process, let's measure alignment and let's measure the metaphors. And so you can see here the people that say they have an effective S&OP, which usually has the stages to the right, say that they're much better controlled, they're much better aligned, they're more agile, they're more proactive, and more strategic. So the first discussion we had on metaphors. But one of the issues that I think people have is if we operate S&OP within a function and we can't cross over that big wall into the commercial teams and we're not clear on what the customers need, we can't talk the same language and we can't get to the ampersand in S&OP. And I think it's the ampersand that really drives alignment. It's where we talk about mix. It's where we talk about complexity. It's where we talk about value. It's where we talk about what is customer service. And I think we're really struggling with the ampersand. What do you think, Bob?
I agree. I wish I knew the definition of that word so I could really be effective in being able to respond to you.
Bram, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's certainly also what I see is that it comes back to the same theme that we are working as functions. We are not yet working as supply chains, and by doing that, we just leave a lot of value on the table because companies or projects and companies that I have seen made the improvement clearly have an improvement on the turnover. They improve their service, so they just sell more, and because of the better service, they can get a better margin for the product, and they do it with more optimal cost, and they do it with less inventory. So it's so obvious that this is driving value for companies, and still it's so tough to get the ampersand really connecting the S and the OP. So, but as the pressure increases on company, and certainly from that perspective, and to my opinion, the financial crisis has helped us a lot, because it has made clear that inventory, which long was used as a buffer, is now part of the equation as well. And if we want to get inventory down and get costs down and improve service at the same time, I pity for the disbelievers, but you really have to talk to each other. So there's no alternative. It's the only way forward.
Well, I agree. And one of the things we talked early in the conversation was the traditional metaphors people are using, and the fact that, we've got the evolution of technology, which allows us to use new forms of analytics, unstructured data, weather data, map data, and people are evolving the processes for, either visibility or S&OP to use these new forms of analytics. And we talked about, the traditional way of implementing and then the new way of implementing. We got a question, and I'm going to throw it out there, Bob. Where do you see people testing innovation, and anything around this movement that you would share with people to make it easier and, I guess more comfortable with an organization?
That's a great question. And I have found that in the majority of cases that when we do engagements around technologies, there's two different schools of thoughts of how to engage. There's what we call the Big Bang Theory, which you have right up at the front. It's large projects with known outcomes. And then the digital way of small projects that evolve. Usually, these large projects must be completely embraced by everybody. And that's sometimes difficult to do in a political environment. So I think in this digital environment, for instance, around inventory optimization engagements, which I'm familiar with, it usually starts as a small, defined, scoped project to understand if we do this at this level, this is what's going to happen. It builds from there as you begin to prove out your assumptions and can prove out your long-term benefits. That's the way I see a lot of successful projects going on within supply chains and it gets back to what Joe said. It's innovation and experimentation, but then the idea is how does that fit? And that's the next step is when you do these kind of things to sell projects and to work within an environment, you need to do this in such a way that you say, this is what I'm doing, this is the metric, this is how this metric falls within all of our stuff. As I said in one blog that I talked about, supply chains are a lot like golf, where it's not just all beat the heck out of the ball, it's finesse. And that's what supply chains are all about. How does it fit within these metrics? And then as you move out, how would it fit overall? And that gives you that capability of that movement through the organization so that it's successful and it catches the C-levels of decision making.
Fran, your thoughts?
Well, we are a small company, so we are really involved on the right side, doing small projects and moving companies forward, let us say more in an iterative type of approach. And my feeling is that it's very attractive to a lot of business users, and because of the lower cost, it's also a more gentle way to explore which things are really going to work out. And I do believe that in supply chain it makes a lot of sense because of the complexity. Supply chain planning or demand planning and advanced analytics is not something that you just draw on a whiteboard. You can try to draft it into a kind of a large blueprint on how you want to approach it. But because of the complexity, you really need to go through experimentation and learn as you go. Because just simply visualizing data, you're never sure which type of data will trigger the planner the most to get the insight he really needs to make the right type of planning decision. So I truly believe that the let us say cloud-based solutions and instead of selling software, renting software, all of these mental changes and technological changes that we have gone through is facilitating a completely new way of improving supply chains, and I'm personally also a big fan of it because of that supply chain complexity.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap up now. First of all, thank you, Bram. Thank you, Bob. And I want to be sure that everyone can get access to a couple things. We are posting the agenda for our new Supply Chain Insights Global Summit, which is going to be at the Phoenician on September 6th through the 9th. I'm very excited about the program this year. We're going to be doing a lot of work around network of networks and the evolution of analytics and looking at use of analytics and Internet of Things and robotics to really fuel new business models. We'll continue with the work we've done on supply chains to admire. The other thing is I want to just encourage people to sign up for Beat Fusion. Beat Fusion is the community that we have launched, which we have about 650 supply chain professionals who have joined the community. We've put 800,000 pages of content, all the videos, the webinars, the reports, and it allows bidirectional dialogue. And Bob and Bram are bloggers in the community. We have about 12 featured bloggers, and we federate that content every month. And we would love to hear from you. Our goal is that Beat Fusion becomes the Yelp, so it has rating and review capability for software, the Monster, so you can post jobs. If you're looking for a job, you can put your resume. If you need people for your team, you can put resumes, and it also allows for discussion groups. And we've packaged and are continuing to package our work on metrics that matter so that people understand what's possible in this complex thing called the supply chain. So, this is Laura Ciceri. We're preparing our newsletter for the year, and we'd love to have you engage with us. We want to help supply chain leaders everywhere make supply chains better. Allison, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And I want to thank you as well as Bob and Bram for your time today, and thanks to everyone that joined. Just a couple things to wrap up. As you can see, Laura did share with you all the links for us to be able to engage with us. So check out the different websites that we have. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter. And again, as Laura said, to attend the live event. We both have the Global Summit as well as the Supply Chain Shaman, so the Shaman Circle coming up. So we do encourage you to look out for that. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're going to send out the slides and recording links to everyone that attended the webinar. So keep an eye out for a link from me tomorrow. We also encourage you to join our LinkedIn page and follow us on SlideShare to be able to get access to these decks. If you can't find the information in the deck, please feel free to reach out to either Laura or myself, and we'd be happy to help you. And to wrap up, we'd like to wish everyone happy holidays and a great new year, and we look forward to helping you accelerate the performance of your supply chain operations in 2016. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.